Oh, no, I don't remember that.
Okay, folks, we're on, and the world
I
is
remember
watching.
the drive down on the square.
Hello, world. Something to that effect. Well, we're here to talk about this truck, which, as I understand it, is one of the last remaining TJ-48 production vans left in the world. There is one in the process of being restored, but this one has just about all of its original equipment, and we used to work with it. I'm Leland Hubble, and I was chief engineer and station manager for WGSF, which was a small PBS station owned by the Newark City Schools, Newark, Ohio, and we acquired it in 1969 from a station in Salt Lake City, Utah. And other than the paint job, it is pretty much as we received it at the time. And so we're going to talk about the experiences that we remember, and we each have a slightly different slant on things. Things about the TV station itself, which was rather unique. And it originally went on the air in March of 1963. And we terminated operation at the end of June in 1976. And at that time, this truck was donated to the Ohio Historical Society, and it sat there in a warehouse until 2 years ago, and it was brought out on loan, and it's placed on display here. John Hall was one of the first students that I had working with the station, took one of the first classes. We have an adult volunteer and mother, Christine Black, and they're from Newark. And so we'll talk about the experiences. We have a lot more people that we are in contact with on occasion, but three of us are the only ones here today. But I want to go back to a cover picture of a Sunday magazine on May 14th, 1967. And I'm wearing a jacket similar to the ones that students are wearing there with Channel 28 on it, because that's what we were originally broadcasting on. So this is from the Columbus Dispatch in 1967. And you can see one of the first studio cameras that we had were donated to us by a station in Cleveland, WJW-TV. And it was a field camera, a TK-10 field version called a TK-30. And we had two of those. When we got the truck, it came equipped with 3 more of the same vintage of camera, an image orthicon camera. And so we could swap back and forth. But the truck here is a 1948 model, and the students were, shall we say, later models. And it, this is another photo on the back of the studio. I didn't check this out, how he's going to be able to handle the photos, but it looks like he's zooming. So, situation in the studio often, and in the station, was to improvise. And you can see a totally different type of Vidicon camera that we eventually put into a film slide chain that was used temporarily. And we were known for sort of improvising. But John, what do you remember about this series of...
Well, what's funny is that when you look at this picture here and you look at the size of the studio, we would have killed for a studio this size. We probably could have put about 3 of our studios into the room that we're in right now. And sometimes we would be having 2 shows going on. You know, we'd have one show set against this wall at 6 o'clock, and then we'd have another show with the set on the other wall at 7 o'clock. So the station itself I have a lot of memories about, because I did a lot of the actual studio-bound programs. I did a lot of programs with the truck here, but it always seemed like because I was good at getting people together to do interviews, you know, we'd have a lot of interview programs at the station. Once we found out that we were going to get this van, we realized that it was going to open up the opportunity for us to go out in the community so much more and do so much more programming. What we had been doing was great. I mean, we had people out on the air almost every night. We did at least 1 live program every night, sometimes 2, sometimes 3. But when we would go out to do something, we would have to take so much equipment, and it was just such a nightmare. And now that we had this van here, we really utilized it. And I don't know if, I know, Leland, you have here somewhere a list of programs, and I'm not sure what year that was, but we used to do live programs, music programs in the studio that was shown to the junior high and the elementary schools. And then we would go out and do programs. We have a tape here that, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here, but on this tape, this is a 1-hour helical tape, right? We have 2 programs on here that, if I can remember how to get the tapes out of here. There we go. We have a trip to a program called Talking Turkey, where we went to one of the turkey farms, and I bet you could see a lot of animal rights violations at that tape today. And then another, that was a good show though. And then another program that we did down at the Newark Police Department, where we actually set up, and I remember doing this, set up outside the Newark Police Department with this van and ran cable after cable after cable down to the basement of the City Hall building and did a tour of the police department, which was, yeah, it was just, nobody could go up and down the steps because we had so many cables, you know, spread everywhere.
Cables was one of the big things. And the operation, sometimes people say, well, you know, you were freeloading off of the students or the community. Well, sort of worked out a deal. We went to the various organizations in the community, local historical society, League of Women Voters, the Council of Churches, various collectors organizations, you name it. We said, look, we don't have a staff, we don't have much money, but if you would like to use put programs on our air, we will allow you to use the facilities, and you come in, take some training, and they found themselves behind cameras and behind dollies. Yep. And we have a picture back here of Christine during a parade having her hands on that dolly, helping move it around a little bit. But from an adult standpoint,
well, I wasn't an adult volunteer, but it came about because my son wanted to take one of the summer classes between his junior and senior year in high school. And he didn't have a driver's license yet. And so he signed up, and that was my first contact, was driving him up Horns Hill to take these classes during the summertime. And he was more interested in the technical end, and has, in fact, is now working as a chief engineer in a television station in Rapid City, South Dakota. But that's how I got involved to begin with. And then he said, well, they have adult volunteers. You can go take a class and be an adult volunteer. So I did. And I didn't know it was going to entail dragging a bunch of cables around and duct taping them to the floor, and then trying to get the tape off when the program was over with, and winding them up in figure eights so they would go in the truck. But I did a lot of that. And I ran camera every once in a while, and just kind of made a nuisance of myself, I think. I typed
useful
one of those lists once for
Yes.
John.
People volunteered and did a lot of things. This is a little brochure that I found. I kept most of the station information, the records, the correspondence, and I have it. Hopefully, we can get it in some permanent archive someday. But this talks about people needed at the station, artists, and we had those, clerical, we did
Oh,
some of
yeah.
that, journalism, writers, reporters, photography. Your other son got heavy into that and made a career out
Right.
of photography.
Photography.
A lot of people went on in the business from their experience, and it was perhaps different than what they worked at, because you mentioned earlier about working with several different aspects of it, but that was one thing that we had. Everybody got a chance to try whatever they wanted.
Yeah, and like for example, it kind of boiled down to one or two of us became directors, and to this day I still direct some programming for Time Warner Cable. We do remotes with a production van that is much more advanced than the one behind me, but not as much fun. And this, with a lot of good memories and some frightening memories come back with the van. The one time Tom Miller, I'll get this one out of the way. Tom Miller and I were taking the van down Horns Hill. Now, how best could you describe Horns Hill? How high is
It's
it?
200-foot high hill, northeast corner of Newark, and it was an ideal location for a transmitter. It was not a good location for a studio, but there
Right.
everything was.
Because when it snowed, if we had a live program, people would have to walk up the hill.
Yep.
If we had a taping that we had to do, we had to get down the hill. One time I can remember strapping a helical
You and I
deck.
carried that thing down.
We carried it down, and one time
100-pound recorder.
we strapped it to a sled and took it down the hill. But one time, Tom and I were leaving the station on Horns Hill in the van. Tom was driving. There had been a windstorm, and trees had kind of come down a little bit. And Tom asked me if you look up here at the top of the van. He was driving, and there's a latch, and it's an exit trap door up at the top there. So he asked me as we were going down to kind of keep an eye and make sure that we were going to clear the trees. Well, there is one corner as you're coming down Horns Hill that is the definition of a hairpin curve. I mean, it is literally a complete 180 just about. And we were coming down the hill, and Tom hollered at me as I'm standing on the ladder checking it out, "John, I think the brakes went out." And how we made it down that hill, my life was in Tom's hands, and he was a great driver. And somehow he was able to make that corner. I jumped down in the van, and once we made that corner, there was one more little curve to the right, if I remember right, and then come back up to the left. Then there was a long stretch where you could come to a final to a halt, and I can remember that was probably the closest I'd come to experiencing an early death right there. But Tom Miller saved my life with his great driving.
I had to live through all of this.
Oh, yeah.
We will get to a situation later of an incident with your son,
Oh,
but
yes.
let's, we had a 410-foot high tower up there, and the microwave from the truck was pointed toward a dish mounted about 100 foot up on the tower. There was no electronic rotator or anything. When we set up downtown or wherever with the microwave, we couldn't go too far out of town. But when we set up, I'd have to go up the tower, climb the tower, and align that dish on the truck. It was easier to align the one on the truck, but the one on the tower, I had to climb up there. But, and you've seen channel 31 on the truck, and I mentioned 28 here. We started as 28. In 1970, a situation arose where they wanted to construct a television station in Columbus, and there was some problems with the channel assignment, and it would interfere with a large radio telescope. So they were hunting for another channel, and the only one that they could find to move to Columbus, Ohio, was Channel 28, and we were on it. So a lot of officials came and said, would you be interested in changing channels if we can pay for all the modification and equipment? So it was worked out, and eventually we became Channel 31, and life went on. We changed over.
It was so difficult, though, because one of my duties was also to be the announcer, and we would record station breaks in between the programs. And it was always so tough to remember that we were not, even though it was written out in front of me that we were not Channel 28 anymore, we were Channel 31. But that was difficult.
Habit dies hard.
Yes, it sure did.
Habit dies hard. All of this was part of the Ohio Educational Television. This is a brochure in the late 50s. A lot of communities were looking at ways to get programming into school in the midst of the baby boom. And the Newark station sort of caught them by surprise. The WGSF stood for Gaines Slater family. He was a man who was associated with Owens Corning Fiberglass, and he donated a lot of money, as did some other people, but the amount that he donated qualified naming rights, and he was able to get the GSF for Gaines Slater family. So that's where that comes from. Now, to find out just how much Newark knew, John and some of the other students put together a Newark test. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and if I remember right, we did this at a time when we did not have a camera.
That's right.
We had no cameras. The camera that we did have on loan had been taken back.
Yes, to Cincinnati. We had
Right.
a couple of Dumonts that you trained on in the summer.
Right.
We did have, however, one camera, which is sitting over here. It is a iconoscope slide chain. So you guys made up slides with a Polaroid camera, transparencies. We acquired this old, we called it lantern slide projector.
Yep.
Big thing, and mounted it so it would project into that. And these guys continued to do programming without a regular television camera with slides. It was real dedication. Finally, a man came in doing a survey from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. It was just being formed. He looked at what we were doing and he said, there's got to be some way we can help you. And he went to a station in Cleveland, WJW, and it shows here the time that Bob DeBenedictis and Bob drove up to Cleveland, to WJW, and we arranged to pick up these two cameras, like the ones that are in the truck, but these were TK-30s. One of them has inscribed inside of it something about left field. They used them to tape the Cleveland Indians baseball. But those are in another location now. But we had the studio cameras for about 3 years, I think, before we got the van. Mm-hmm. And we attempted all kinds of programs, even with the studio, but people had to come up to the top of the hill and work on it.
And it was always, we always liked doing the remote programming a lot better, because when you bring people into the studio, it kind of inhibits them and they're not themselves. But when you go to their location, you know, you're in their ballpark and they open up a lot more. So I think a lot of the programs that we did on remote were some of our better programs. I can recall doing one down at the local train group that had miniature train.
Oh, yeah,
That was
the
an
layout.
excellent program that we did. It took a long, getting power, which we talked about a little bit yesterday. Power was always an issue with this van. What was some of the, what did we have to do to get power for this? You can tell I'm the production guy. I always got to turn to him and say, can we make it work?
They learned very quickly that if they didn't want to mess with the cables, they had to be involved in the programming, announcing, production end. They had to go talk to the people beforehand. And I've sent out some emails for responses. We have a website for the station, and the address is http or www.wgsf.oldgleaner.com. And we have a web page, I have a blog, and we have a email list server. And I think there are about 48, perhaps, of you former students, and you're on the list, that we communicate with continually to this day. But I'm trying to collect the history of all these various activities, and especially recollections, things like this, and trying to find out what people remember. When I talked about doing the program with the truck, the biggest thing was the same thing you mentioned, cables. Cables. Every time we went out, we had to set up with camera cables, microphone cables, and power cables. This truck got very hot, even in the winter, and would need the air conditioner. So we had one power cord for the air conditioner, 220-volt air conditioner, and another one for the truck. It took 50 to 60 amperes, for those of you who know something about electricity. That's a good bit of power to plug into. And in the back of the truck, there is a switch box that we used, and we had various clip leads and plugs and things. If we got into a place that had a electric range, we could generally unplug and plug the truck in and run with that. But a lot of times we had to actually clip into a power panel, and there were a lot of interesting incidents with that. But
Lots
all
of
of these
smoke
cables,
rising.
yeah, all of these cables were necessary. One of our gals that worked primarily audio, but she helped with the cables and all. And this, incidentally, we had both genders involved, and they could choose whatever they wanted to work at. And she remembers particularly dragging cables through poison ivy, going to the fair and having to wipe the cables off. Excuse me. But the fair was one of the big things that we did. You want to mention something about that?
The Hartford Fair, which is held in Croton, Ohio, was kind of like Licking County's fair, and it's usually a week long, 5 to 6 days. And we would go up there and do a kind of an open-ended program every day, a half hour to an hour. And basically we would just look at the schedule, and we would go, if there was the King and Queen contest, we would go and cover it, get some interviews. If it was Goat Day, we would go and interview the person who won the grand champion for the goat, get some shots. We had one of our hosts. We usually had different hosts every year, and one of our hosts got into a cow milking contest. He'd never been even near. He was from the East Coast, and he'd never even been near any kind of animals. So we just had some great experiences with that, and that got us a lot of promotion out in the county. A lot of times there were some areas of the city that didn't receive our signal as well, but sometimes out in the county, and even we would hear from people down in Perry County and in Fairfield County. We would get letters from people down there that enjoyed a lot of the programming. And I remember getting letters about some of the movies that we used to show on the station. We used to get a lot of old movies and show on there, Laurel and Hardy and old serials. but we would also get letters from people in other communities wishing that they had something like us. They said that they enjoy watching, the programming that we did and wish that there was something in their community that did something similar.
We would take the truck to a lot of places. We went to Perry County a number of times. There was a steam show that we
Steam show.
did. Did you work any of the steam shows?
I was there, I didn't do it.
Okay, so you're familiar with it, but we'd go down and they would get all of these old tractors and things and run by on a parade, and we would tape them. We would take the tape recorder with us when we go out, tapes, 2-inch helical tapes. This is a picture of one at the Hartford Fair. It's pretty small. Maybe they can add it in later, but Mitch Morrison is doing an interview in that photo. Again, a city boy talking to farm kids. And that could turn out to be interesting. And one year we did 8 hours of programming from the fair. 8 hours with this. Took it back and we broadcast it in the evening. We also would broadcast it. We had a booth set up in one of the buildings and would put the copy of the tape on a small recorder and play it back so people could come through, and that was part of our advertising. There are a lot of interesting things that would happen sort of on the sideline. We were taping one day, the fair is in August, it was quite often hot, and we were taping a lady who was talking about her canned food at the moment, and all of a sudden I see shot of the rafters in the building. What's going on? Well, it turns out this one boy hadn't had anything to eat all day. I didn't know that. And he fainted. And there went the camera. Fortunately, we were taping. The recorder would edit, and so we eventually got everything squared away. But there was one girl that I think she was probably down at the fire department's EMT headquarters before he stopped bouncing. I think she's a nurse today, I'm not sure. But this is the way the things worked out. We did Land of Legend Festival, television shows downtown on the square. We would set the microwave dish up on the Licking County Courthouse and do them live from downtown. Chris says she doesn't remember it, but of course you've got crowds.
Oh, yes.
And anybody can come walking in. Well, one day this, shall we say, sort of tipsy fellow.
Quite inebriated.
And
well, he had been in a bar right across the street from where we were, and he saw the crowd gathering there, and he come out and come across the street, and I had been down, I helped go down and help set up for the program, but I wasn't doing anything after that, so I was in the crowd. And I saw him come up, and he was talking, "That's television, I bet that's television." And I could see everybody's faces wondering, oh my gosh, now what do we do? Because he was determined he was going to get up on that stage where the television was. So I walked over to him and just kind of sidled up against him and started talking and kind of pushing on him. Finally got him backed out away from the crowd, and we didn't have a big scene, but yes, I remember that.
crowd control.
Crowd control.
If you couldn't do anything else, you
yes.
do crowd control.
Yeah.
It was just interesting. We would have,
And another thing too, not to interrupt, but just that's a good thing about the doing programming like this is that it gave a lot of us a chance to go out and meet business people in the community, because we couldn't sell advertising for these programs because we were a public broadcasting station. But we could give out some prizes on the program, and we would go to places and ask them for like gift certificate. We had a Coke plant in the area. We'd ask them, if they could give us like some 6-packs of Coke and things like that. So, and a lot of the students did that themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And we would just give them just a bare mention on the program occasionally. We couldn't actually do a full-fledged ad or something like that. But we had some of our students that were really interested in doing that type of thing too. And a lot of them kind of got their first feet out into the business community by going out and raising. And we would only do that when we would do these types of programs. But it was just another aspect of the station that I think a lot of people don't realize, you know, that it got us to go out and learn how to speak to people. And
This was an important advantage of being involved with this. We had at least a couple of people that I know of that went on to be involved in city government, city council,
Yep.
things like that. A lot of people went on to be teachers, engineers, as well as in broadcasting. And Mitch, we mentioned there, is still working in broadcasting today out in a station in Illinois, is doing editing. And he sent me a videotape, well, not a videotape, but a video that I put online showing the equipment that he now works with. You know, going from these old tube type cameras and equipment to very modern. And as I mentioned earlier, the equipment in this truck was older than the students. Many of them were, this is 1948, they were born in 50, 51, 52 when we started, and going into 76. And you can just imagine the experience that they had working with this original equipment, which is now in a museum. You ready for a museum?
you know what's funny is that we didn't think it was, you know, we didn't know it was old. You know, for us,
it didn't
was
matter.
all that we'd had to work with. And when you put together shows with slides and things like that, you know, when you finally have some equipment and cameras to go out and actually do some things, it was always nice to hear people say that they enjoyed the shows. And sometimes I think we did some terrific shows that I think even today still hold up.
I was talking to one of the young ladies who had been involved with one of the summer festivals, and we were showing a snippet of it. I still have some of the tapes and the recorders. It'd be nice someday to be able to get those transferred and to have them preserved. But she was watching this snippet of her hosting the program downtown. And she turned to me and said, "Do you realize that I was only 17 years old?" And she was hosting this program that was going out from the local community on our TV station. I hear from a lot of people from time to time. This is a clipping from the Newark Advocate paper. One of the first things that we did when we finally got some cameras to work with was a dramatic production from the high school called Little Women. And the director of that is a man named Bob DeBenedictis, and I'm also in the photo there. This is old Dumont television equipment that we'd borrowed from the PBS station in Cincinnati. And over here are two of the students who played roles in that. And I heard recently from this student, that was named Donna Brown. The other was Sally Morrow. But Donna Brown managed to locate me on the internet and said, "Do you remember that play?" "Oh yes, I remember the play quite well." And I found this photo, so I need to send it to her. But I did give her information that I had of how to find some of the pictures up on our website, and she was just delighted to find that and know that I still remembered. Here is another of the play called Little Women, and it was interesting. I decided during one rehearsal, just before we actually, and we broadcast this play live. We didn't even own a recorder. We didn't own a recorder. We did it live. So they would come up and rehearse. They brought their own tech crew, the whole thing. And one of the scenes involved a dog. And a boy, I don't know whether it's this one or not, came on set and handed the girl the dog. And this was just before I planned to punch them up on air during a station break that was promoting the play. And the dog bit the girl. This is the kind of thing you work with live TV. But it is remembered by many of the people who belonged to the student staff, we called it. And they had jackets and the patches and all of that. So many of these are just sort of memory prompters. Here is a copy of some of the photos are on the board behind me about the truck, and it was quite common to go downtown and set up and do these shows, and a lot of the businesses would let us tap in.
And of course, the live shows like even the shows that we would do like at the turkey farm and things that I mentioned, they were pretty much live to tape because we couldn't do a lot of extensive re-editing back at the studio. Occasionally, we could do an insert edit on the helical thing, and if we missed a shot, a close-up of something, we'd get it later and then try to insert it back in later. But pretty much what we did is what actually aired. And if you made a mistake, hopefully you had a way of covering it. I could go into hours of editing, trying to edit with the helical machines, but that was
definitely
that
was
a
not
million laughs.
automated.
Yeah, it was a million laughs. Yeah.
Automated.
But going out and doing these type of things, though, it was always we had such good camera operators most of the time that we really didn't miss a lot. They turned out very well.
One of the things that's necessary when you change channels, and this is labeled from 28 to 31, it's a picture of them taking down, oops, they're getting a little brittle, taking down a tower section, or the antenna on the very top of the tower is the actual transmitting element. And the story of how we change channels is a whole program or a book almost in itself. That was an interesting time. But with Chris here, I want to refer to a particular incident at that time. Do you remember that?
I probably will recall if you say what it is. Mm-hmm.
The offices for the station were downtown in an old gymnasium area. I got a call. Mr. Hubble, come to the station, quick. Says they've got Dan Black strapped to the rig and they're going to lift him to the top of the tower. When I got up there, he was all ready to go on this big ball. And he went to the top of this 410-foot tower and handed the people bowls.
Yep.
But one of the guys, who's now a county commissioner, came over to Dan, as they're standing around watching this, and handed him a camera. And Dan, while you're up there, will you take some pictures?
Oh yeah.
And can you imagine the liability today of that with a high school student doing something like that?
I don't know whether we were nuts or just especially trusting. Now I know you guys were up to some merriment from time to time.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, you're hard workers.
Mm-hmm.
When it came time to get serious, it got done, and it was just amazing. Were you on the trip to the camp? You went up?
Oh yeah, yeah. Camp Abandon.
Yeah.
Was that the one you went to
Mm-hmm.
and came back?
Yeah.
And you had a Barracuda.
Yeah, I had a Barracuda. I had an old Plymouth Barracuda. Which I'm remembering that part of the story, but I'm forgetting the rest of it.
The one where you went to get something out of well, there's another student, Tom Miller, we mentioned earlier, and I were waiting there at the station for them to come back. They had been going up there, and I don't know whether they did program or whether you're just checking things out in advance.
I think
And they
we
stopped
had-
to get some pop out of a machine, and it sort of threw it at them. And they came in, the doors of the car popped open, and they literally fell out on the ground laughing.
That's right. That's
And we're
right.
standing there, what have they been into? It was just a situation you're never quite sure what was going to happen. Now, I've worked with other stations and things, worked with the school for a long time, but we never quite had anything, I've never experienced anything like working with this station.
Yeah, working with the students, and you could always tell when somebody would come on board that wasn't going to make it. We would have a list of people that was assigned to different programs. Like I worked certain shows and other people worked another show. And you could always tell the ones who were interested would show up sometimes an hour and a half, 2 hours ahead of time. Even when we would do the remotes.
And walk up the hill in the
And
snow.
walk
Yeah,
up the
walk
hill
up
in
the
the bad
hill,
weather.
right.
When we would do remotes, they would be there. Like I was always notorious because I know everything, I still am to this day. When we do our remotes, we like to get there 4 or 5 hours ahead of time, just to make sure we get everything all done. Usually 5 minutes before airtime, something blows up anyway. But we always like to do that. But you could always tell those that were there right at the very beginning and were wanting to work. The ones that stood around, we would try to get them involved, and there were very few of them. Most everybody really wanted to work and wanted to work hard, and we had a great crew. There were some people that kind of came and went that would have been good if they'd stayed on, but their parents moved. One of the guys we've been trying to find for years, name of Don Geske. If anybody out there knows where Don Geske's at, he was one of our best workers, a great guy. From New York City, he sounded like he was straight out of a Bowery Boys movie. Great guy, and we've not heard from him since, so we don't know what happened to him.
Every once in a while, somebody will turn up, though. There's one that hunted me down, came out to where I live the other day. He is now a professional magician. And he said, you can't believe how much the work with the station prepared me for what I'm doing today. And we hear from a lot of people that went through that went on into the military or some other line of work, but yet that gave them something extra special. In the case of your two sons, they go in sort of different directions, but into a professional job that went out. It was just an amazing experience, but in spite of the cables and everything, they loved to go out and work with this truck. It was an adventure, and we did just about any kind of thing imaginable. We did ball games, we did games in the rain,
Yep.
we did basketball. We had a weekly, during the school year, sports program with the school athletic director called Wildcat Den
Yep.
with Jimmy Allen.
Yep.
And that was a very popular program because they always had some spatial feature for the open.
Yeah, we would always do some sort of a comedy type opening and calling Mr. Allen something different. And for a long time, we were doing 2 shows of that a night. We would do one show for a certain group of athletics and then another show later with another group so we could get everybody on. But the idea behind that show was to try to get some of these athletes TV exposure and also to increase awareness of Newark High sports. Newark High's football and basketball teams were really top drawer back then in the 60s. And they've had a few good years off and on since, but not to the extent that they did back then. So the program was always highly viewed by the parents and the grandparents and the community members that were really interested in the school. And once we got this van and were able to actually go out and do some of the programs, some of the tapings. At the time, I wasn't too interested in sports, but I would always seem like I'd get called to do color with Tim Bubb, who did play-by-play. And Tim would delight in calling me out on different things where he'd turn to me about some interesting play and ask me to diagram it, and I'd go, I don't know. I just didn't have any flow. So thanks, Tim. To this day, I still bug him about that.
And Dan Wade, I heard from him, he's still working in the business,
He did a
working
lot
in
of our
radio.
sports.
And he just loved doing play-by-play, and he was mentioning some of the things that he had done and how he got out of working with the cables by going out and helping set up the interviews on it. But there were things where they come up with a deal where one of the students had wasn't a motorbike, a small motorcycle of some sort though, and he put on Jimmy Allen's jacket, put on some goggles, a helmet, and came riding actually into the studio. And then we switched to another camera with Jimmy dressed like that, taking his jacket off. His wife saw that, and Jimmy really caught it.
Yeah, he had kissed Luann on the way up, too, as he walked in. Luann Stoya, who's now a news director at WTVN Radio, worked with us. And she was standing in the doorway, and Doug gave her Doug was Jimmy Allen's double, gave her a peck on the cheek as he came in. And then the next shot was Jimmy coming in, live. Of course, he didn't know that we'd done that before, and his wife had seen that on the air live and thought that Jimmy had kissed this young girl on the way in. She didn't realize, most people would be able to tell that Doug Leach wasn't Jimmy Allen. But, one thing, too, I wanted to have you bring up, too, was once we got this van, and then we decided to start doing a daily news program, which was very challenging in a city Newark size. Thank gosh for Rip and Read and some features that we used to get from the USDA and things like that. But we did a daily half-hour news program, and we had some of the earliest technology of being able to go out and do news gathering along. So if we wanted to go down and interview the mayor, or if we wanted to go and interview somebody with there was all kinds of problems with the Forest Hills subdivision at that time. The truckers' strike. I can remember going out to Route 70 and getting footage of the truckers' strike, with all the trucks just parked out on Route 70. Tell them about the equipment that we used, which was very early and innovative there.
I saw some of it during one of the early television program productions yesterday, or talks. Small, reel-to-reel. We used Panasonic and a Sony half-hour recorders, EIHA. Would bring it back in, play it on a monitor, and shoot it off of the monitor with one of the Vidicon cameras. That was our poor man's time-based corrector. And so we were doing that type of operation before the time-based corrector was developed and putting it on the air.
And that was really our way of gathering news. So when we would do the interview, we'd have to make sure that we didn't waste any space. We'd have to make sure we would do the interview. Basically, the way we shot it was the way it was going to air. And hopefully, if somebody goofed or said one of the political guys might have misspoken and wanted to change his answer, we'd have to go back and start all over again because we could not do any actual editing with that at that time.
And you were the originator of the Rotten Egg Award.
Yes.
I still have a slide of that. Do you have the original Rotten
No,
Egg?
I don't. I was a huge movie buff, and somehow I talked the owner of the local theater into letting me come in and review movies for free. And then I would do movie reviews on the air on our news program. And got to see a lot of great movies free. And it was great, and I enjoyed doing that. I'll never forget one time I reviewed the movie Myra Breckenridge, which was one of the first studio-produced X-rated movies. Today it would get a PG. And I made the comment on the air that after I saw the movie, I said I felt like going home and scrubbing with a wire brush. That's how bad it was. And we used to get some good comments about the movie reviews. People say I should have went on and become, Siskel and Ebert.
He had quite a collection of comic books and information and a lot of knowledge. I had an offer of a program package one day of a bunch of old films they were going to run on the Ohio network. So I called up the station and talked to John, and every name I'd mentioned, he was right there with who and what. I think maybe you missed one.
Yeah.
But we played a lot of old film, and he would put together a lead-in, and then we'd run these. We had 16 millimeter film projectors into a film chain camera, and so we had quite an audience for a lot of those old programs.
One of the funniest things was occasionally, if I didn't get a chance to do one of the intros live, on tape, I would do it live. And I remember one night we were showing an old 1940 Republic serial called Mysterious Dr. Satan. And we had we'd show Zorro serials, Dr. Satan, and things like this. And one night we were showing this film, and I was out, I had done the live intro. And then I went out and sat and watched the episode with our engineer on duty. And all of a sudden, we're sitting there watching this, and the film's going, and all of a sudden we hear this horrible racket, and we look down, and we see the reel of 16 millimeter film rolling down the side of us into the trench where all the cables were in the control room. And it turned out that the film had broken off. We were so intent in watching it, the film had broken and was spewing out all, and the whole reel dropped off. The take-up reel had dropped off. And the film had broken, but it was still going through the projector and doing anything. So we had a real mess splicing that all back together because it had fallen down into the trench where all the cables were and wound itself up, and we had to put it back together and send it off to some station in Tennessee, which was showing it next. So yeah, we had all kinds of interest. That was that was fun.
Yeah, we toyed with instant replay. We'd take again with a small recorder, and we'd record some part of a game and wind this back and again shoot it off of a monitor. That was our version of instant replay. If there was any cheap way it could be done, we'd find it. Yeah, it was just the way we operated. We joked about it being the world's only operating historical museum, television museum, because we had all this old equipment. And as John said, we never really considered it historical in that sense. If it worked, we used it. We didn't care. And
it was all black and white, too.
All black and white. We never, now
Never
the
did a
transmitter
color.
was eventually colorized,
Yeah.
but this was one of the things that sort of led to our demise, to get actual color production equipment. The helical was not color. The slide chains were not color. We could pass through network, but to acquire color equipment, even with a state grant that was being proposed, was just unbelievable to us. And so that's one of the considerations that sort of led to our closure. They said, even if we give you this equipment, like a quad recorder and color, they questioned, and they were probably right, we couldn't afford to maintain it once we had it.
The cost of the tape and the cost
Yeah.
of the maintenance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the tapes for the helical, they were a spatial tape. They looked like the ones used on the standard broadcast quad recorder at the time, but they were spatial made for this helical recorder. We used an Ampex 660B, and they were pretty reliable recorders all in all, but we never had a quad. Came close a time or two, but this was our videotape source.
What was our biggest tape was,
We could hold 2-hour reel
yeah,
on
and
that.
this is a 1 hour.
We could go down, I think the smallest ones we attempted to do anything with for some promos like your lead-ins or something was maybe 10 minutes.
10
But the
10 or 15
standard,
minutes, yeah.
this is a half hour, or is it an hour? I think it was an hour.
This one's an hour, because we got
Yeah,
two shows
hour.
on here.
Yeah, the half hour is smaller. And we
105.
had 90 minutes, yeah, that one's a minute 5:40 seconds. And I've got a lot of those old tapes. We've talked about converting, but we've never gotten it actually accomplished.
Somebody told me, I think John Loudon had told me there's a place in Chicago that would be able to transfer this.
Because I have some recorders, they need some work, but I've actually got 4 660Bs sitting in my basement. Actually, 2 Bs and 2 Cs. But We
Start a
never,
TV station.
yeah, I've got some stuff that needs to be in here or someplace. Over at the side, we haven't talked about it. This is the actual transmitter control panel from this station. I kept that as other station equipment was sold or given away or trashed, but I kept that, and I've put it on display different times, but that was the control panel that actually switched the video to the transmitter.
And the students were only allowed to touch this with an operator
Right.
standing nearby because the operator was still
licensed.
FCC licensed and had to
Right.
be there too.
That was another thing, that you had to pay somebody that had a regular broadcast license to operate the transmitter. Eventually, we did decide to shut down the station, and the truck, as I mentioned earlier, went to the Historical Society. I kept a lot of the equipment. Some of it I used at the high school. I moved down to the high school. I used the 660 for a long time until we got cassette recorders. First the 3/4 inch, and later we went with the VHS. So watching the talk about recorders here at the television convention, early television convention, was like a trip back with old friends. You know, I remember those. And so we worked on cable. Once the station went down, you transferred to the cable system and made a career out of it and still do some things.
Yep.
We're leaving Chris out over here.
Oh, that's all right.
We worked a lot with League of Women Voters, with the hospital. I think you were probably in some of those programs.
And election returns.
Yes.
Yeah, that was
Toastmasters.
I'm probably one of the few people
United Way
that was
Parade.
ever hosting a program and got a notice the transmitter went down. The RL side of the transmitter had a tube failure. These expensive transmitter tubes, every now and then, would die on us. Well, this happened to be audio. I got up, left the studio, went out, got a new tube, put it in the RL, warmed it up, put it on the air, and went back in and finished the program. Now, how many other people in the world have ever done that? I ask you. But that was the kind of operation we had. The transmitter was right there in the control room. We had visual sight of the thing. It was right there in front of us. And
Just through a regular door.
yeah, it required, of course, an operator. And we had some interesting relationships with these people. A lot of them were people that worked at the Newark Air Force Base or station. Had a technical background. Many of them would acquire a first-class radio telephone license, and they'd want to pick up some extra time, a little bit of extra money. So we didn't pay much, but it was something, and they'd come up and work at the station. And we had a couple regulars that worked evenings and weekends, and well, on Sundays, not too many of you ever had real contact with him. But Jesse, during the week, you called him Coach,
The coach, yeah.
and you got along real well with him. It was that sort of thing. But we had a list of adult volunteers, and they were more specific to particular groups and programs.
Right.
And so we always had several things during the year, before election especially. League of Women Voters put things together. We had a call one day. There was a requirement that if a station broadcast a certain political related event, candidate for office, you had to offer equal time to all of the other candidates. And Frank J. Lauschie was running for governor. And we repeated a lot of programs from the educational station here in Columbus, WOSU TV, it's on Channel 34. And at a meeting, the station manager said, we have this program available, and it features the opponent. I don't remember now who was, whether it was John Gilligan, somebody running against him, and said, if you choose to air that, you are obligated to give Senator Laushi equal time. Oh, we already aired that. So we contacted the senator's office, and in a couple of days, we got a call. I'll be there at such and such a time. This was during the daytime. Our students are in school.
there, yeah.
But we did get the permission. We said, oh, this is unique. So we did get permission to get some students out. We had the League of Women Voters. We had somebody from Denison University to anchor the program. And we did this thing with Senator Laushi. And so we had contact with people like that. We did later have contact with Gilligan as he was running for governor. It was just amazing the contacts you had through that program, that station, with people.
One of the mayors of Newark who appeared on a program, on a panel before election, swore up and down that he got elected because he got to be on that show.
Could be. Could be. We had a lot of things. We had a lot of entertainment. We had a call-in program.
Yeah.
We used a tape cart machine. We didn't go live with it. We had a tape delay of a sort. And we had some interesting things. We had a cancellation one night. We called the program Communiscope. And it was a live program, call-in program. And they call in, they'd tape the question or comment, and we'd play it back so they could hear it in the studio, and then he would comment on it right there. Well, whoever we had lined up.
Canceled. They canceled on us at the very last minute. Or it was the day before, and we always had an ad in the paper. So we were trying to figure out what we would do, and at that time there was a big controversy with the Beatles' Abbey Road album. And since all of us were big Beatles fans on the crew, the cover of the album showed the four of the Beatles walking across Abbey Road, and the thing was that it was a rumor that Paul McCartney had died. And because he looks like everybody else is dressed like a grave robber or a priest and everything, and that he didn't have shoes on and wore a very shabby suit. So it was a big controversy as to whether Paul McCartney was dead or not. And we did a whole hour show on this. We had one ad in the Advocate about it. Is Paul McCartney dead? And now I look back at it, it was kind of like today's reality TV, I guess, trash TV type things. And we had people calling up. That was one of the most popular shows we ever did. It's amazing to think that in this day and age, but once again, it was a local community, and people looked to that program on Tuesday nights. Even though we were up against network competition because we did it at 8 o'clock, it was we would have local businessmen on, we'd have local civic leaders. If there was a controversy about school levies, about anything going on in the community, we would try to have it on that program. And we would try to, that was one of the nights where we did something silly, and it worked out really well.
That was,
What do you think the size of your audience was?
pardon?
The size of the audience. What was the size of our audience? The potential?
No real way of knowing, but at times it was sizable. We had a trivia question thing on Jimmy Allen Wildcat show for a while, and it was not unusual for it to lock up the local telephone office because they had so many calls. But when they took a survey, it would be according to the Columbus metropolitan area. And so we were, even at the best, we were such a small part of that was insignificant. So we rather seldom knew. I don't know, I imagine you did. I would be out in stores or something. If I was anchoring a show, people, oh, I've seen you on TV.
Still to this day, occasionally in Newark, somebody will come up with me and say, I used to watch you when you used to host Laurel and Hardy movies and the old cowboy serials and things like that. So it's amazing. My wife still can't believe it. Somebody says, 35, 30, 40 years ago, and they still remember
Yeah.
some of the programming that we did, because, yeah, we never really had any kind of ratings or anything. We just know that when we would open the phone lines, the calls would usually come in. And that's one thing we always wanted to try to do with the truck, is one of our goals, we never able to figure out a way of doing it, was doing a live Communiscope program with the truck. Because there would add such an extra layer of activity on top of everything. We just couldn't do it. Yeah, it was going too far.
Yeah, even the election coverage would have people at the station anchoring and people downtown. And working with that, we soon found out limitations, because the boards of election, we thought, oh, when we get a chance, we're going to put all of these things on right now. And we found out that you don't have access to that information. Not that they weren't giving it, it just, they didn't have it either. They had priorities and things that they would do. You were mentioning the school levies. Those are still ongoing. They were a source of problems as far as funding our operation and other things at the school. One of the things that kept us on, of course, was the daytime instructional programs. We had 2 teachers at that time that taught elementary music. One taught the 1st, 2nd, 3rd grades, the other 4th, 5th, 6th. And we did a lot of programs with the teacher, Mrs. Armstrong, that taught 4th and 5th, 6th grades. And we could put those on and watch in every school. And she didn't have any way that she could touch every classroom individually in person every week. But with the program, she didn't have to present all of that. She just could come in and follow up with what they were doing. The Board of Education, one of the first programs that we ran after the truck arrived, well, one of the first things, of course, was graduation, commencement.
Yeah.
We did that for years, even later when I didn't use the truck. But we did a program at, it seems to me, in early 1970, when they had a levy issue, and there was a lot of discussion about how much money the Board of Education had. And a lot of rumors were flying around. We did a live broadcast of the Board of Education meeting, and the rumors stopped. The discussion stopped, because the presentation, when you would go into a store and somebody say, well, I heard that, and somebody would say, no, I heard it this way. Everybody knew. They tuned in and they watched, and somebody would say, well, I heard it this way, and they say, no, because I saw it live on a TV broadcast. There were things like this that just made the work that we did worthwhile.
Right, and back then, channels 4, 6, and 10, of course, weren't as powerful in their outreach in the communities. Now you see a lot of Newark and Lincoln County news on all the Columbus stations when it's something of major interest. But even back then there wasn't as much coverage of Newark activities as there are now on the Columbus stations. So really the people in Lincoln County felt like, they weren't being, their stories weren't being told, and that's the reason why our programming and the news that we did, even though some nights there was nothing to report. How we put together a half-hour show, I don't know, but we did. And but it was a great service to the community.
But
I
people
had
were willing.
calls from John several times. Chris, you got anything we could put on the news?
But people were willing. If we say, we'll tell your story if you're willing to help.
Oh, yeah.
And what we got to do? Well, they may have to help with cables or whatever. It's like the hospital, when they built the new hospital.
Right.
We couldn't go out and do a tour, but they took pictures, they brought it in, and he brought a crew. They got volunteers to come in and do the camera work and behind the scenes, and a group to be on air. It just was amazing. But when we got the truck, we could go to the Model Railroad Club. We could just take in all of these kinds of things. I remember, I think you were involved tonight. We went down to one of the churches downtown. This was in, what, 1970? It was the day or the night of the student riots with the war.
Oh, yeah.
Kent
yeah,
State.
Yeah.
And we brought the truck back down to the high school campus, or I drove down ahead of the truck, and a couple of guys come out with shotguns. What's going on? Because they had heard that a group of students were headed toward the campus, intent on mischief. And they checked out who I was, and then we came in with the truck, brought it back to the high school campus. But that was a successful broadcast. We went downtown, actually went to this church, and were able to set up. They did a choral program. We went to a lot of churches
Yep.
for various things. This was just the way it went, where something was there, and it was possible we'd tackle it.
We're gonna do it.
Went out to Christmas tree farms.
Oh, yeah.
Just amazing, all the things that we did. And it's a wonder that we didn't have more problems. But the truck was pretty reliable, all in all.
Yeah, it was.
I'd mentioned a previous talk about the truck. One of the interesting things, my wife and I went out to Salt Lake City and drove it back. We could both drive stick shift, and so that required somebody could do that.
Yep.
That was a limitation with a lot of people. But on the way back, the speedometer cable broke. It's rather critical when you're driving through these small towns that you maintain the speed limit. But I had noticed from driving along that about 35 miles an hour, the driver's side mirror, outside mirror, would vibrate.
Oh, there you go.
You get much above that, it quit. And at about 55, the floor plates around the gear shift would vibrate. And so if you were in town, you'd put it up to it vibrate and then back off a little bit, you're probably safe. And the same thing when they were doing double nickels on the freeway. You'd drive up till it floor plate vibrated, back off a little bit, you're probably safe. And we stopped and had it fixed, and we found this old gentleman at a automotive repair shop, and he was just entranced with this. He had worked on these engines many years before. Let's see, General Motors, a Chevrolet chassis, truck chassis, and a Boyertown body, cab over engine, and oh, it was just like meeting an old friend for him. And he says, you keep that thing under 55 and it'll run forever. Somebody was asking earlier if they checked out the engine. I don't know. I haven't heard, but I doubt it. I imagine they hauled it up on a truck and they pushed it in here
Yeah.
some way, and it's upon jacks. But it wouldn't surprise me if a person knowledgeable tried that it would start and run. It just seems to me that would happen.
Yeah, yeah.
So we really got a lot of use out of the truck, the equipment that we had. It's just delightful to be able to come and take a look at this thing that we spend so much time with and have so many memories about, and see that it's finally, after all these years, out on display. People can come and take a look at it, and all the others. I was showing them earlier a picture of a studio monitor that we have, and I don't know whether they've got something like that here in the museum or not, but we had some old television. We just put the use for the studio monitor, and when they finally wore out, we just scrapped them. Like, what else do you do? You know, they die. So looking at the equipment here, that's been sort of interesting. And you came in on the other end. One of your sons was working a station, and you had one of the first digital TVs, I understand, in the area, probably.
Probably.
Could be, yeah, well, that's what he said.
Very good.
But
Yeah.
now everything is, of course, color, digital, cable. It's just amazing, but we can look at this older equipment to tell us, show us in the future where we've been, where we've come from. And so it's just really a delight to have the experience of once again seeing this equipment.
Yeah, and the people here that have the early TV museum here in Hilliard, they really This is the first time I've been here, and it's not going to be the last. It's really incredible here. And if anybody is listening or sees this and gets a chance to come over here, it's definitely worth the trip. It's the collection of old TV sets out there is just to die for. It's amazing to see.
And they're running some old programs
That's
on
right.
vintage programs.
Yeah, I can tell you which one they are, too. So.
I'll bet you can.
I don't think there are very many TV stations now that are held together with duct tape.
No.
Oh, we were experts at that and knew what to tap.
Uh-huh.
Knew what to tap. I had a calibrated finger.
That's it.
Yeah. And I had a superintendent who swore I kicked it, and I did never kick it. No. But I tapped the right tube. Yeah.
We were in line for some, was it federal funds or
Yes.
one time, and a man who was in charge of everything from Washington, I think, came to check out the station, and then he held a meeting at the high school, and I went to hear that. Uh-huh. And he said, the last thing he said was, well, I don't know whether we'll be able to, send you any money or not, but he said, I think everybody in the agency that I work with will be interested to know that we've had an application for a grant for duct tape.
We did use a lot of it. And in the business, you called it gaffer's tape.
Yeah.
Call it technically gaffer's tape,
Yep.
yes. But WGSF termination set. And so on the evening of June 30th, 1976, we shut down the transmitter. I went back of the transmitter, disconnected the transmission line that went up to the tower, connected over to a box, another transmitter device, a translator that came on automatically the next morning, rebroadcasting Channel 34 to the North community on Channel 31. But we never had local input from that time.
Yeah.
The truck went to the Historical Society. Most of the people left. John went to cable. I went to the high school. I remained with the school system and worked through cable, and that's another whole story. But we never again had that camaraderie, that feeling that we had working with the station, with the truck, with the equipment like that.
Yeah.
So WGSF, 1963 to 1976.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's a wrap.
Well, that was good to get a lot of that on, too, That's great.
Shame we didn't have some more people.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but this is gonna live forever now. I mean, you got to tell your story. We'll get that up on the web. Do you have photos of this, of all this stuff? Can you, or would they be accessible? I unfortunately don't have time to
Yeah.
take snapshots for cutaways.
I haven't made, now, I want to give you this. A lot of these things are on that website.
Okay.
And I intend to put a lot of these others. Something, what isn't on there
Well,
will be put up on the
I'll
website.
correspond with you as this comes along.
Yeah.
I'll try to give this a priority.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes forever, try
Yeah.
to fit this in around the edges. But I'll correspond with you and through Steve.
Yeah, I know. I
But
listened to
what
some of my
a
friends that
wonderful.
lost track of it. Like,
Now,
were they
did you
just to
see
the States someplace?
the short video that we put up on YouTube?
Yeah, but if you
Of the
if you
truck
have a
Steve
name
took us.
and
Okay. Now,
approximate
Steve was
date of
winging
birth
it.
or
I mean,
something
he
like
didn't
that,
really
I
know
have,
what he was talking
Yeah,
about.
there's a couple of
How
things
close,
I
how
caught.
close did he come? Did you?
Yeah, a
Did you
couple of
catch it?
things particularly that I caught.
I know Lynn
One
would
is
love
the
to
air
see
conditioner.
Mm-hmm.
It came to us with the air conditioner installed. The other, that sign, historical vehicle
It is
sign,
John, right?
Yes.
they put it on down at the
Mm-hmm.
But
museum.
basically, he did pretty good then.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
but,
I-
oh,
have
people,
you- Have
people.
you seen that? Have you looked at
What's
that? His presentation on YouTube?
I put Steve in here and made him walk us through it
No,
for
I haven't,
YouTube.
no.
And he actually, he said, well, I don't really know, but he gave it a try and he did pretty good
Yeah,
apparently.
he came pretty close. There's
People-
a couple of
I
things.
show that, people love that. They're just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, yeah. I have, you can't believe how many different hits. Now, I'm not by any means a big
We
website.
finally stopped.
No, I'm glad you went so long.
Oh, listen,
That's
you know, we're
absolutely
only gonna
wonderful. I
do-
will watch, I had stuff I had to do now, but I will certainly watch
Only
this.
gonna do it once, you know, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll be in touch with you, and if you have or can
Yeah,
get me
Steve
some of
knows
those
how to get in
shots-
touch
Yeah,
with me.
yeah, absolutely.
We've got the
Okay.
website, and
All
you
right.
go to that, and it's got this information on there.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got a photo album, I'm continually adding stuff.
Mhm.
I've got some things to add. I've got to get back busy at it again.
We'll poke at it again. I'm sure we'll have fun with it. All right, so I gotta run then. I'm
Okay.
just gonna leave everything here.
That's fine. Call me
And-
whenever you
and-
want to do it,
and, yeah,
Dave, and I'll meet you.
All right, or you just wanna say, you know, wanna be here at 9 o'clock
9
by
o'clock is
default? Okay, I'll call you between
Call
now
me
and
if
then.
it's different.
Okay, I'll call you just to confirm if I can,
Okay.
but if you don't hear from me,
I'll be here
for
for
some reason.
Nice,
we'll meet
nice
here.
meeting you.
Yeah, same here. It's been a lot of fun. It's
Steve.
always a lot of
Yeah, nice
fun.
meeting you guys.
It's always
The first time
it's
I've
always
been
a hoot
over
and a
here, it's
half,
not gonna
so
be
thank
like
you
that.
so
Yeah, great.
much.
Leland,
This
thank
is
you very
just
much. Your
great.
presentation was wonderful. I
Yeah.
didn't get a chance to tell
Oh,
you.
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
it's really,
There-
thank you very much for.
There are just more and more and more stories with stuff.
Oh, yeah, he can
Yeah.
talk
Just get
forever.
And if we had more of us here, you know, we could probably come
Right.
up with a bunch.
Right.
This is our control panel. You know, I've thought about something, I'll check with you. I've still got a tower section,
Oh, I'd love that.
and we could, it was made to mount this receive dish,
Right.
or I mean the transmit dish, instead of using one as a tripod. When we used it, most of the time we used this tower. We had several sections, but I know I've got one section at least.
Well, that, we
I could stick it in the corner here.
and we can just put this on.
Yeah,
We can
right,
attach it to
right,
the
because it has a mount that fits a hole, a plate on it that fits this mount. Now, we could set it up there back out of the way.
That would be
Now,
great.
I've got I've got oodles of stuff.
Well, Leland, I would be happy to drive out.
I've got to dig it out one of these days. The family would be happy to see something. But I've got a number of things, I'm not sure what all still remains back there. Some things in the house. I've got an equipment rack on wheels. We could set it up here. I've got this control panel like we could put in it.
Yep.
If that would be acceptable.
Yep, absolutely.
I've got an old Conrack receiver that we used. Unfortunately, I don't have those old studio monitors. I'm not sure what I've got in the way of monitors.
Well, whatever.
I've got some small,
Right.
small monitors, possibly some twins and threes
Okay.
that we could put
Sure.
something in because they're like a few.
And if you let me know when, I'll come out and help you dig all that stuff out if I'm not
terrific.
working.
Well,
Yeah.
just let me know, basically,
We
I'm gonna
enjoyed
be
your
here
program very
for the
much.
next 2
Thank
months.
you.
But I'll be